Hey, everybody. Gonna have a couple people trickle in out here. Uh, Happy almost Friday. I know, we are near the home stretch of the week as well as home stretch of the program. So, yeah. Okay, so
So,
y'all know the deal. We'll start in about 10 minutes. Get your coffee, tea, all that stuff beforehand. And get ready for some React lessons out here. Okay, I'm gonna make you guys host a pause. Okay, I'm gonna resume recording for us to, um, look at this later if y'all are inclined to. Um, yeah. So first and foremost, happy Thursday, everybody. It's good to see all of y'all in here. I am going to first kind of like do a little bit of housekeeping. I just wanted to kind of talk through what we're kind of like going to do for the next 4 weeks. And answer a couple of
ထုတ်ပြီးတော့ပါ
questions.
ပါတယ်ရှင်။ဒီနေ့ထုတ်တဲ့ထုတ်ကအမှုဖတ်50တာအတွက်လုံလောက်တာမို့လို့ကျမကတော့မှုဖတ်နှစ်ပိတ်တာ
Hey mate, right there. Basically, first things first, I do want to kind of share a little bit of more about, like the capstone project examples that we could be doing. Um, you know, so y'all can get a little bit more insight on that. And then I'm gonna kind of review a little bit of what I asked y'all to do last class, which was kind of that small little React example. I know that like I only gave y'all like 10 minutes, so I'll kind of like share what that would look like. And then we'll go into a little bit more lessons on React. Okay, so first things first. Again, so what we are, the end of this program is really going to be wrapped up with a capstone project. This capstone project will be a group project. Again, it will be a group of either 2 to 4 people. Y'all choose your groups. If you can't find people that you want to work with, we will kind of put you in a group. But my what I want to kind of like get around is like the goal is to kind of be grouped up by like in our Saturday class when everyone's together, try to find your tribe to kind of think through what y'all want to do. So again, as I kind of mentioned before, we have a couple of options on what to do for our capstone. We have our lovely portfolio page, which is kind of enhancing this assignment here. Let me share my screen real quick. Bam. Okay. So kind of expanding this. And here's the deal, like, there may be some students in cohort 1 that may be interested in this. So what's cool is on Saturday, I'll kind of like see who's interested in working on this, first 4 people, whether it be in cohort 2 and or 1, y'all will kind of group together. Y'all are all on Slack, so you can kind of communicate together to kind of figure out your working schedule. And just your major goal is also to get every student in here as well. So it's a mixture of enhancing this, but also, making sure that instead of 45 people, all 60 students who are still in the program are actually on here and references to their portfolio website. The next thing is a example of the next project that you could possibly work on is basically a blog page. The idea is kind of think of this as a Twitter like or Facebook or Pinterest type experience. So, you get a little bit of understanding, making a good front end, making a good back end. We'll go into back end development throughout the course while y'all are kind of working on your capstones. And, that's a really cool way to kind of just enhance, like show that you worked on both aspects of a full stack program. The next one is going to be a wow, I had them all in my head too. Curse of actually chatting with y'all. The next one would be a chat app. The idea is really just kind of like being able to chat with one user to another, being able to kind of figure out how a message can kind of go through the web, hit another person's computer. Um, Building a cool front end for that as well is also really awesome. Um, Let me also share the other ones. Ooh. GitHub, where are you, GitHub? Oh, apologies. I feel like I have too much pollen in my head right now, so I'm running a little slower than I'd like. Or yeah, Capstone. Oh, an e-commerce site. So the idea is really like, hey, you want to sell something, you want to build something that actually looks and feels like a Amazon like or something that's kind of catered to a niche, as Luis shared. An example could be like an otaku kind of like e-commerce website, as you saw. Recipes, so if y'all are fans of cooking, make your own HelloFresh like app if you're interested in something like that. And yeah, those are kind of like, demo is, that's just kind of like showing us a little demo of how that would look. But the idea is like, hey, this is what you would kind of build upon. So here's the deal. As I mentioned before, these subject matters can kind of feel a little like you're being kind of like bottled into a subject matter, but as I mentioned before, there's a lot of, you can kind of take this core concept and go wild with it. So for example, Sinam and her group, their final project was kind of like, instead of taking this e-commerce idea and just turning it into a website to buy stuff, it was kind of like a website to travel places. So it was like, hey, you want to travel one place, you can kind of like see the highlights of that place you want to travel to, but also like you'd be able to get tickets and hotel reservation leads based off of what you're interested in actually going to. So that can technically be considered something like a e-commerce site. So, thinking about it in that sense is what I challenge you to do. When I make like I do a lot of like game jams. I used to do global game jam a lot and stuff like that. And what they normally did in these jams is they have like this topic, this theme that you have to work on. The theme can be as simple as time all the way to what is it? Rituals, which was one that I did, a couple years ago. And when you really think about it, like, hey, what does that really translate to? It can kind of like be perceived one way, it can kind of be perceived a whole nother way. Long story short, these kind of like five subject matters that you can kind of branch off of, as long as you're kind of utilizing the scaffolding that we gave y'all. It would be easier to kind of like not start from scratch, and also we'll be able to easily help you out in your journey. So what's going to happen is, we'll kind of do our lesson for the first part of the class, and then we will kind of give y'all a little bit of time to work together on like like the capstone a little bit, but like there'll still be like one or two labs over like the three or four that I usually kind of assign y'all to do. So that's gonna be the structure. So you're still learning for the first bit, but then the other bit is just kind of like y'all taking what you learn and putting it into like one or two labs, but primarily just kind of taking that and working on your final project. On Saturday, we'll also go into a couple of like really cool tools that you can use to accelerate your development. As I mentioned before, utilizing AI the right way is one of the best things you can do. You'll try to go into a small little example on how to do that over just build me the app, please. You know, and um yeah, like and I'll share examples of things like Material UI, Tailwind CSS. I personally use Shad CN at work. These are some really cool things to kind of have you instead of focusing on like designing things like you really focus on the complex problems, like how do you make a e-commerce site that specializes in Yu-Gi-Oh cards, or how do you make a blog site that talks about cool things to do in New York for under $5 or something like that. Um, so uh, before I start yakking on about React, do you have any questions on the Capstone project? Nah, nah. Okay, cool, cool. All right, so
Before you go into that, Hisvacio,
yeah,
I was gonna say, I'm not sure if you saw my message, but
yes.
while you're lecturing, I was gonna just open up a breakout room and pull out some students that need help catching up. So,
Yeah. All right. So actually, that was another piece I wanted to mention. Thanks,
okay.
Shahid. So first and foremost, kind of want to like mention, like, I don't quite know. Let's pause this real quick.
Mhm. Uh, the other thing that I had mentioned about just having a breakout room while you're lecturing,
Yes.
because there's a few students that need to catch up. So,
Yeah. And
um,
also, that's actually something I wanted to mention here as well. So
yeah.
basically, I'm going to be creating a breakout room. Shahid, thank you for kind of basically catching the students up. If anyone is like feeling as though they're running behind, again, these lectures are going to be recorded. So feel free to jump into that breakout room to just kind of like catch up on some of the stuff that you are missing on. Okay.
Yeah, and
So
feel free to DM me if you need any help. Otherwise, I'm gonna go into the breakout room and then like there's a few students that I already spoke to, so I will
perfect.
call you into there if I'm ready to help you. Okay?
Yeah. And we're gonna do breakout rooms like again soon too. So basically, I guess what I would recommend is like basically so I'm gonna you might get booted out of the breakout room when I put everybody else into breakout rooms, but like we'll
Yeah,
just
that's totally fine. We'll figure that out if
yeah.
that's an issue. But yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty.
So I'm creating one now.
Thank
You
you.
have room one. I'm assigning you in there.
All right,
And I
thank you.
think you can just kind of assign anybody that you
Yeah, yeah.
was in
I
there.
was gonna handle it myself, but thank you. I didn't want
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. You're good. All right. So, feel free to just grab the other students that need to go in there and enjoy that. So, okay, let's go into a little review, and then we'll go into our lecture. So, if y'all remember from our last class, I basically left y'all with like 10 minutes to kind of just work on this little exercise where you're supposed to kind of style a button based off of like how many clicks you've done. Let's kind of walk through how this would look so you can kind of get a little understanding of how to write JSX and like React LAN for those who kind of were like, all right, I just scaffold up my app. All right, now you're telling me I basically Like it's, like but now you're telling me class is over. So, first and foremost, I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen okay. I can't see y'all, so
Yeah,
if someone wants to
yeah, we
just,
can see.
yes. All right, perfect. All right, so if y'all remember this app over here, let's kind of make sure this app is still running. Local host. If we see here, this is our little button app here. Um, this is from us scaffolding up our app. Kind of scaffolding is basically like getting the pipes and stuff like that ready from our last little app. It was like my first React app. Let's refresh this. This is now broken. Bam, beautiful. Dev should now be good. All right, buddy, wake up. This thing is as slow as me right now. Okay, cool. We got our button working. Um, and this is kind of what you should see minus all of that extra logo stuff that you get when you scaffold up your app. I actually just removed those to make it a little simpler so y'all can see what's going on here. So we're going to go into state. We're going to go into props and stuff like that a little later on in this lecture, but I just want to show you how we can kind of play around. So, if you see, we have our little button here. This is going to be our little powerhouse. We created our state, which is basically this is again a little reminder of what state is in React. State is what triggers your component, like your little Lego block piece that is modular, but once you put them all together, it kind of builds out your modern web app. State is actually what re-renders that one component. So what's kind of cool about this is like this little, let's say if we had, like 5, 10 components, this one component will do a re-render. So think of that one little Lego block doing a re-render instead of the whole house basically having to like re-render on the browser there. Again, that's what makes React so kind of like modular and powerful and fast. So again, how we kind of create this, and this is what was scaffold. So it basically we have this like little structure, almost like an array here, but what it does is actually we have a const that holds our state, and we've created a state called count, and then we also create a function called set count. So like the way this is kind of set up is like we will have a little this will always be the same way. So set count. So if we had another state, it would be like, let's say if we had something like color const color, because we want to change the color at some point. The way we would set this up is we'd have set color. And again, that's kind of how we initiate a new variable that's kind of attached to our state. We're going to use this function here called set state. This is kind of inherited from React, and this is what powers our state. Once this is set up, it now knows like, hey, like I now know I'm going to be used in state. So let's do something like green here. Green. All right, cool. So example, you can have a number, you can have a variable, and change it to blue, you can change it to yellow, whatever you want. And then as you can see on line 20 here, we have this event listener. Y'all remember the event listeners from our DOM lesson. This is kind of how we would do the same thing in React. We have our event listener on click, which basically does what it says. It waits for an event on click. It's within our button component here. So it's waiting for a click event on our button. And within If this is called, it passes in that callback function, as we remember from our last, DOM lab, our event handlers kind of pass in callbacks, that those callbacks kind of wait for the event to be triggered, and then that function's called. This is kind of a anonymous function that really just um, calls the function set count. We have our parameter of count in here, and what this function is really doing is just saying like, hey, count increased by 1. That's what onClick does. Um, because we are using set count, which is part of our use state function, this is the structure this is the structure of React to kind of like tell our application, hey, it's time to like re-render the browser if this changes. So we're actually adding 1 to count. So that would actually cause a whole re-render. So we go back to our app, we re-render, like everything basically changes, and then we check for count here. So count starts at 0. We add 1 to count, that changes our state, which causes a re-render of the component. And then basically we check to see what count is at this point. Oh, it's 1. Oh, it's 2. Oh, it's 3. That's kind of how that's working. So you see here, that's kind of how this is working right now. So now, how do we use this to kind of like change the color? As I mentioned before, we can write JavaScript inside of our HTML structure with JSX. So one of the things we can do here is actually have this concept of like, a style. So this is a style tag. And what this holds is kind of like whatever style we want. Here's the interesting thing about styles in React. Again, styles can be referenced through CSS, like the traditional way here. But if you want to do some logic, what you can actually do is like add styles in this kind of direct structure here. And the way we kind of do this with React is we actually like a style has to kind of be in this object structure so it can reference all of the elements that will be part of it. So let me show you what that looks like. So if I were to kind of open up our little um, object here, we can kind of call something like background. Brown color. And remember, this is kind of the JSX structure. It has to kind of look like almost like a JavaScript camel case variable here. So if we were to kind of just say something like, hey, what's the color? I want it to be our color here. Remember, we have our variable here. Ah, someone came in late, so just kind of lost focus of the browser here. Okay. All right, so have a little color here. So in theory, this should be now blue. Let's take a look. And it is, as you can see. So again, this is kind of how you would write um, styles in JSX. But remember, with JSX, we can kind of do something cool. We can kind of write JavaScript in our HTML. So what I want to do, is kind of basically what we talked about in the assignment. Hey, like if something, if our count, if the count as we keep incrementing is um, divisible by 3, we want to change the color. So let's give this a try. So instead of color, I'm actually going to, do something called a ternary here. This is basically a if statement on one line. And what this does is just basically check for something. And if it's true, then it will execute like basically one thing. If it's false, it can either do nothing or do something else based off of what you want. So, um, what am I trying to do here? Let's actually basically like think through this. I am trying to see if count is divisible by three, because then we know, hey, if it's divisible by three, then like we should change the color. So first things first, I'm gonna ask like, yo, count. Hey, is count divisible by three? Here's the thing. I want y'all to kind of remember, if y'all did the FizzBuzz lab, you would know like there is this concept called a modulus, which checks for if something has a remainder, which is basically what we're looking for here. So that is a percentage sign, and the idea is like, all right, is it divisible by three? The way we check that is basically, checking to see um, is kind of like this. So here's what this is really doing. A modulus is really just checking to see if there is a remainder once this thing is divided by the number to the right. So, basically what it's doing is saying like, hey, I'm dividing this by three. Do I have a remainder? If I do have a remainder, then technically it's false. If I have a remainder of zero, then it fits perfectly into my three, which means it's divisible by three, which is basically what we're looking for. So that's our first kind of like section of a ternary. The idea is like, all right, we're asking the question on the left. We kind of divide it by a question mark there. And the idea is if that's true, I want this background color to be our color here, which remember our initial state is blue. So, bam, we're gonna do is this is kind of the equivalent of this colon here is the equivalent of an else statement. So the idea is, all right, if this is true, we're gonna actually this whole background color is gonna be color. If it's false, which is after the colon here, yeah, we do nothing. Honestly, that we don't give it any styles. So keep it where it was. And if you like this really just breaks down to uh this I this statement here. So if count is the modulus of count is three, if the modulus result is basically equal to zero, which means it's perfectly divisible by three, I want you to kind of like return color. Else, we are returning nothing. All right. Don't mean to like, don't freak out with all the lines there, but like what I want to just show you is what this ternary is really doing. It's just basically it's a very short version of this this if conditional here. That's all I really want to show you there. So now we're not actually writing that if conditional right there. Okay, so enough talk. Let's see if this works. We take a look here. All right, this is a little odd. It's the initial zero is blue, but if we click on this, you can see that it actually goes back to the normal color. But moment of truth, let's see if it hits three. Bam. All right, pure perfect. So basically, let's see. Hopefully, if it's six, it should be blue again. As you can see, if it's 9, 12, 15, so on and so forth. Any divisible route is basically going to change the color there. So this is cool. I would say we kind of got like a very rough rendition of what we want, but I actually don't really like the fact that, technically zero, like divided by three is technically still zero. So I want to add another kind of edge case to our if conditional here. And this is kind of how we would do this. It's kind of that concept of if this and something else is true, then execute the solution to the right there. So the way we can kind of simply just do this is just adding an and. So what I want to do is say like if count is not equal to 0. So if it's not 0, and let's read it the way it's actually written. Basically, if the modulus it basically if the remainder after dividing count by 3 is 0 and it's not the count is not equal to 0, then we want to render the color that we have here. And if it's false, if that's not the case, we are just going to not render anything, which means it'll go straight back to its CSS class attributes, which gives us the old design there. So let's see if this works. If we refresh here. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Every time it's divisible by 3, we change the color there. And what's cool about this is a more scalable way. I kind of told y'all in the last kind of lab, hey, like go up to 12, if it's divisible by 3, 6, 9, and 12, then change the color. This is kind of a scalable way of handling that. And what I would, I'm gonna have y'all again, like finish this lab and so like later on, but what I challenge y'all to do is think through an idea of like how you can probably change color as well and set state to a different color based off of like some other behavior you want there. So think about that. But this is a very quick way while learning how to like work with styles and changing styles in JSX. This is a way you would actually be able to change the color of of a background color or a button or something else based off of your state change by clicking this click event here. So let's run through the logic really quickly here. Technically we click the button here. This sets our state, basically updating the counter to what the counter was +1. Basically, when this re-render happens, because we change state, state change always re-renders our component. Basically, this whole line, this whole block of code here is re-executed, and the background color then checks to see if count is the count modulus of 3 is equal to 0 and count is not 0. If those two conditions are true, we're actually going to change the color of the blue. Blue is the default state of our second state that we've declared on 9 over here. And if those two conditions aren't true, we are doing nothing. We're just going to return basically a empty string. It goes in again. When you click on it with the count of 2, it checks. Both of these are false, so there is no color change. Then when we finally get to 3, 3 modulus 3, the remainder will be 0, and count is no longer 0. Then we render color as our background, and we get our lovely blue color here. This is a small example of how you can like play with state to kind of manipulate your app based off of like your logic here. So I know that's a lot, but any questions right now on the solution to that little lab from Tuesday? Taking that silence as y'all are all experts. But seriously, no questions are silly questions. If you have any questions on any of what's going on here, just let me know.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Uh, so like in the top, what's the point of set color?
So here's the deal. if we wanted to do something based off of um, changing the state of the color, we actually need to kind of like declare this to be able to utilize state. So set color right now is not being used. If you want to change the color by doing some other behavior, basically maybe if the count is another if the count is another like is divisible by 2 or something like that, you can set state and change the color of blue to green or something like that, and then and then basically from there the button changes that way. You can kind of like play around with that. But the reason why we have set color here is this is kind of the structure we use in order to um like declare color as a state variable inside of our React app. So now this color actually plays like what we have here in set count. So let's say if we do something like this and don't set up our color this way, we won't be able to manipulate it using state changes, and the re-render doesn't really work there. So in theory, if you're not going to like use this whole variable as a state change, basically what you can do is just say like, hey, I have a color. It's blue. Like color equal blue. Oh yeah, you need an equals there. This is kind of what we can do here. If we know we're never going to change the color and we don't want the state change to really like change based off of like our color there. Actually, we know we're never changing the color, we would actually set it as a const there. So these two like when you're creating a state in React, like something to change, re-render the browser if something changes, you would always need the variable name and also a function to actually change the state. The way you set it up is like set and then the name of the variable. So because this is count, it'll be set count. It'll be equal to use state. Inside of the parentheses, it'll be the default value. But if you are if you just want to declare a variable that doesn't get affected by like that won't be changing any state or anything like that, you can set up the variable like this. I just wanted to show you an example of how you can use you don't like every component can have multiple state variables. But if you're not going to if you don't need the multiple state variables, then yeah, you can just kind of set the color like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And here, let's actually go into the app to make sure that this is actually working the same way. Bam, bam, bam. Yeah, bam. Purple. Yeah, bam. Purple. All right. Any other questions here? Or we continue? All right. Um, so let's continue. If we don't have any other questions. All right, let's go into our lecture here. All right, so from Tuesday, remember, we kind of talked about our little exercise. We just kind of went over the little solution there. Instead of doing a hello world, we kind of just did our little counter there. But all right, let's talk about components. We kind of like a little summary. What components are, again, are these little building blocks that build out our React app. Think of a component being the bumper, another component being the little glass window, another component being the little baby wheels. Um, a great way that I also like kind of trying to think of like components in React apps is on the assembly line in like in a Ford motor company where you'll have like on the assembly line you'll have someone basically put in an engine, you'll have someone put in the wheels, you have someone kind of put on the front bumper, and like you'll like that one person is in charge of that one kind of task. That's kind of like what components are in your React app, little, and putting them all together basically turns into the car that you drive. Well, not now with the prices of gas right now, but when that changes, hopefully one day. Okay, enough of my bad jokes. So, component-based architecture, declare a state, tie it in with a specific UI component, and just very much like that little button that example that we just went through. You have a little state, you tie it to a specific UI component. We tied it to our app component there, and we can kind of like change our button color based off of like that state when we want to change it. A good rule of example here is think small to big. Your components should be like single purpose components and isolated scope. So this makes it a whole lot easier to maintain, but also to debug. So if there was an issue with that button press, as you saw, like for example, when it was 0, the button color changed the way that it changed in basically it changed color, but we didn't want it to change color for 0. We wanted it to change color for every number basically after 0. It's easier to kind of debug that in like one small component, like let's say a button component, if we were building this really big scalable app, compared to something closer to like, a big monolithic app where, we had an issue with the nav bar and then we kind of made a change there and then that accidentally broke the shopping cart. um, Small little components isolated, you can kind of work through the issues in these modular like settings there. So another thing to think about when you're kind of building out your components is, like your components should be small components. They should be kind of like reusable through your app. So keep it the acronym is really keep it dry, do not repeat yourself. A good rule of thumb that I like to do is if I find myself kind of building out something twice, that's when it's probably time to just make a component for it. So some examples of that are kind of like, your nav bar, your search form, your create comment form slider. Here is a example. Of course I will talk about this app because I built this most recently, but the idea behind this is I have this whole little top part here is a component. It's called the nav component. What I wanted to do is have it look all sexy and sleek when you're on the home page, but when you click on something like the products, we kind of have a different banner and basically the text kind of changes slightly so you can kind of see this clearly. But at the end of the day, this is all just one component that changes based off of like where you are in the world, in your app. So we kind of inspect the element here. As you see, it executes to a nav, but if you look at the React code, it's basically nav component. It's in our header div, basically holds all of this magic there. To understand where you are on the page, I actually created a where are you? Header. Should have been on the header, but basically we also have the concept of a breadcrumb component here. So, the idea is, hey, technically we're going to be like, this is going to be on every page except, the home page too. So you know where you are. So this is another custom component here that I created as a component that basically all of this is different based off of where you are, but it's still basically the same structure. So kind of reusable. So turn it into another component. So I can basically use that over and over again and pass in basically our location on the page. So that's another example. Other components like our little slider here. So let's say if I want to do so let's say if I wanted to click on a product here, and I wanted to look at specifications here, bam, our little slider here that kind of gives us the whole detail of the specifications of the product is here. And if I were to change it to a different like model here, let's say contemporary here, bam, I'm reusing that same component of a slider, but I just fill it with the different data based off of the different product. This is a more complex idea, but I hope this kind of helps you plan this out as well. So like your components can be small like that, but also it can be complex like this. So this whole 360 viewer, this is a component that I created that houses your 360 model for the product. The idea is, all right, I want this to hold three different types of uh ideas, like examples of a product. So basically the first one is a 3D model that is basically a GLB file. But another problem that I had was like, hey, this isn't the only way this product can be showed. It can be showed in basically this whole example here with this white model, but I never received a 3D model for this. So, but I still wanted to kind of represent it in this 3D way. So this, again, if I click on this button here, it's the same component, but it now holds data, like it holds the data of frames of animation that if I were to spin around, you can kind of see it move around in this way. And what's cool about this is just like 60 different frames taking shots based off of like it in different angles, while the other example that you saw was a 3D model that I used like Three.js to kind of load on the web here. So same component holds basically data in different ways, but again, it has the same functionality of really just showing a product in a different viewpoint. So that's kind of like an example of like, a component in the wild in production, like I wanted to keep it dry. I didn't want to repeat myself. I wanted to basically have a modal. The modal should be the same behavior. You move around with either your scroll on with your finger if it's modable, or with your mouse if it's on desktop. But I will pass in like basically different models. So like one model can be just frames of animation. The other model can be a 3D like product on the web. But I wanted to kind of make sure that like all of those things kind of fit and work the same way. Another small example is kind of like this. So if you keep your components dry, like what you can do is kind of have something work on two different websites with the same component. So I like reused a component for promoting my game here by giving you the ability to where are you? See a location with a 360 photo. So you're like, wow, I can see this in like it's almost like I'm there. Bam. Funny story, that's actually the old model of the character. It looks like the dude is wearing like his underwear on the outside. So alas, that's why I changed the model to make the character look more epic, more realistic out here. But this same component was able to be reused for another website, which is this little website for this horror game. where, as you can see, it looks like the same component, but it just takes in a different image. Same functionality. If you keep your components dry and modular like this, you can kind of reuse a lot of elements from particular like older sites and others and other you can reuse your components for not just like using it in the same app. You can actually use it in different apps because components in React are modular. So pretty cool stuff. Okay, let's go. Let's continue. All right, so what does a component look like? So again, there are kind of a couple of different ways to really like create a component. If you see from our example here, this is considered a functional component. The idea is we know we're not really passing down any props. So like basically, and also you can pass down props in like functional components, but this is like a more cleaner kind of look to your component. It really just looks like a function. It returns basically what you want it to return, like what you want to render on the DOM. You have your components here. And we'll kind of talk about the component life cycle of an app, hopefully today, if not like maybe on Saturday. But that will be housed here in like use effects here. But we'll like again, that's all kind of powered by React there. But like long story short, this is one way to kind of create a component, but you can also create a component this way. So you have like the idea of a class, the name of the component, like hello world. It extends to component, as you can see there. And then basically, every component needs to render something. So as you can see, we're returning JSX that just says hello world here, while our component here in this functional component, instead of us having that whole explicit render function, we're just saying return in parentheses a JSX that we want to return. As you can see, two different ways to kind of make a component, but it does look like they all kind of follow the same rules. So here's some of the gotchas. So, rendering should return a single HTML element. So, you have to kind of return something. Um, as you can see here, I'm returning like this little, like the contents of the button there. And here we're returning just this hello world tag here. And also every self-closing tag, everything needs to have kind of like that self-closing tab. So as you can see here, like, typically if we were doing just straight up JavaScript, we just have this BR tag, but here, BR needs to have that like other like end tag of BR there. That's just kind of the way JSX works. So if we take a look at let me see. We have a code pen here. Nope, we don't have it. Where are you, code pen? Don't fail me now. Here we go. Small little example. I was trying to do with CSS scrolling animation stuff, but if I was writing traditional HTML, I can just do a little break tag like this, BR. And as you can see, that breaks scroll on one line and then puts animation on the other line. While in JSX, you kind of have to like have that trailing tag there. So sometimes like your JSX will break and you'll be like, hey, what the heck's happening? Kind of just remember these weird eccentric rules there to kind of like work your way through your JSX. So yeah. Okay. So let's talk about data and properties. We've kind of talked about state already, but I'll give you a little bit more information on it. But there's really two ways of getting your data into your components. props, which is kind of how you pass in data into your component, and state, which is kind of like what lives in your component already, and then like that's what causes your component to re-render and like the behavior of your component to change. So props is really just aka properties. Props are, you know, like passed into your component. Props are immutable, which means they really can't be changed. You know, like you just kind of once it's passed in, you can kind of do whatever you want with them. But like remember, like it'll never really change inside of you know, it won't change very much like how if you create a map function, it's not, you know, you'll iterate over your original array, but it'll create a new array. It'll never mutate the original array. This immutable paradigm continues on throughout like React here. So yeah, you can really think of props as the default data of your component, you know. So like let's say if I had, you know, like a welcome component and I passed in the name of someone that I want to welcome. Basically, name would be like a prop that I pass in. Remember, like objects and arrays can't be passed in the props, but you can do something like that spread operator that we've learned about a little earlier to basically put your data in that way, and it doesn't take like objects either. So here's a small little example. So let's say we had this little hello world example again here. Hello world extends to, you know, our component, but we say something like we return our JSX with hello. You know, we use the curly brackets to kind of really execute our JavaScript inside of our HTML and you with JSX there. So we pass in basically this dot props dot name to kind of render that. But when we're actually a step ahead, like basically one layer ahead in our app, like, and we're just rendering that component to our DOM, what we do is kind of have like this whole concept of a, you know, like the JSX tag would be like hello world, and name would be the prop that we'd pass into this component. We'd pass it in this way. So name is passed in kind of like a little attribute in our HTML tag, use like, you know, if this was HTML, but this is kind of how we pass it in almost with it feels like HTML as I mentioned, but it's not. Spanglish, you know, HTML and JavaScript. So name is going to be equal to Tom. So when we go into the component, we can kind of reference, hey, what is that props name? So that what is this dot props dot name? Tom. So we'll say hello Tom with the way we've kind of structured this. All right. So, you know, again, how can we make the UI change if we can't mutate data? We can make the UI change with state, as you saw from our example. So state is an object that, you know, is defined on the component level and can be used to render within the render function and define data change. So here's a small little example. Again, this is not a functional component structure. So this is kind of another way you can define a component. One thing I do want to point out is like, you know, a lot of what you're going to be seeing in React land is the new way to um, declare components, which is the functional approach. But you'll be really blessed to be able to do this, but like most of the time when you're in a job, you're actually going to be maintaining code bases, not like building out a whole new like app and stuff like that. So you are gonna like encounter maybe older component structures like this. So I kind of want to show you how this looks as well and how it kind of works. So, you know, we would have something like this called, you know, hello friend, you know, extends to our component. The constructor is basically like, hey, you know, pass in the props. We have like super, which is basically this is using like this constructor. And this is kind of the old way we declared state back in the day. We'd have like this whole this dot state, which would equal an object. We'd pass in the name this way, and that would be equal to props dot name. So let's say we wanted to change our name inside of our component. We wouldn't be changing it in props. We would declare a state called name, this dot state dot name, and then basically we can kind of change that any way we want. So if you take a look here, we have our little in our constructor here, we kind of have like this whole set timeout where we kind of like in 2 seconds, like this is built in milliseconds, so 2000 equals 2 seconds. Hey, this dot in 2 seconds, I want you to run this function called this dot update name. We're binding it to this. This is like the context of our current component. So if you look at what this dot name is really doing is, hey, we're setting the state name to Jeff. So again, I'm showing you this because, like, let's say if you're working at Netflix or something like that, Netflix may have like older renditions of like React components, so it will look different compared to what you are like, what you'll be writing now. Again, a lot of times, like in software development jobs, you're not building out new features unless you're like really just at a startup. You're maintaining current implementations and optimizing stuff. So you would probably be looking at an old component and figuring out how to optimize it. So this is why you should kind of see how state and stuff like that are updated in different renditions of React. So update name, like this is kind of the old way we set state. So like we would run this dot set state, and then we'd have this whole object of like, hey, what state element are we changing? It's name Jeff. So beforehand, our name was Tom. Let's say we pass that in. The prop of our name was Tom. So it started out like, we rendered our function here, rendered it to the browser, hello, Tom. And in 2 seconds, we basically say, hey, call this function called update name. Inside of update name, we actually set the state to setting the state name to Jeff. And remember what happens when we change our state? It causes a whole re-render in our component. So that whole re-render actually would cause the whole component to re-render. So we go back down into basically our render function, and then we say, hey, like return this dot state dot name. Name has changed from Tom to Jeff. So bam. Here's another interesting thing to think about too. Prop types. So defining prop types, properties in your components. Basically, it's kind of like making sure that you're getting the right types in your component when you're building out your React components. This is primarily very important if you're building out your React components using straight JavaScript. A lot of times now people are moving more towards TypeScript. What my goal is to do for you guys is you learn JavaScript. You learn JavaScript. Once you understand JavaScript, TypeScript is going to be very, very easy to kind of master. A lot of companies are moving to TypeScript, but basically it's JavaScript where you don't have to worry about types because you always know which type you're actually dealing with. So beforehand, we basically had to kind of like, this was a way to kind of ensure that we were getting the right types in our React component. So we can have like the type is a number, object, string, so on and so forth. Basically, here's an example of one. So let's say we have like my cool component. We call prop types on it, and basically it's this object structure. And we have like the two pieces that we're going to pass into this my cool component. The first is going to be the ID, and the way we kind of like play around with prop types is this way. So we have this React dot prop types dot number and dot is required. So what this is really doing is two things. We're enforcing the fact that like what you pass into this prop, if you're passing in ID, it has to be a number. If you pass in a string, it basically throws an alarm, breaks your whole React app, and forces you to kind of look at your code to ensure that you are putting in the right top type. And then we also chain on this is required. So what this actually does is it makes sure, like again, your React component will break if you don't pass in an ID into this component. So the idea is like this is kind of how you can ensure that your app doesn't silently break and you're just kind of debugging for hours, wondering why something's not working. Oh, my ID was a string, not a number. But also, oh, I forgot to pass in an ID. You now have this required prop type of this ID has to be a number and it is required. So if it's not passed in, my component breaks. Here's another example. Um, Basically, you have React prop types dot string. So basically, what this prop when you pass it in it has to be a string, but we did not add is required to it. So basically, what that means is we don't necessarily need to pass this in. It's just like if we do pass it in, make sure it's a string. And this is kind of how it would look in an actual component setting. So first and foremost, we're in React, we would import prop types. We would actually have like the whole kind of structure of our React app with our constructor, so on and so forth. But here's the bread and butter that I kind of want to show you. Basically in our render, what we have here is div this.prop.id. So we know this is going to be a number. We know this will always be passed down. So we can kind of have this be equal to something important that basically needs to be in our React component, our ID passed down with a number. But also, we inside of this div, we have like this.prop.message. It has to be a string, but it also could just not be passed in. So we can just have this empty H1 here, but we know it'll always be there with that ID. Don't necessarily know if the message will always be there, but that's kind of how you can play around with prop types. And at the bottom of your component file, this is kind of how you would like execute your prop types. You say, hey, my cool component. So you're putting the name of it, dot prop types equals your ID, prop types dot number dot is required, and your message, of course, prop types dot string. Okay. All right, cool. We have a little bit of time for this. So it's lab time. So basically what I'm gonna have y'all do is 2 labs. Basically what we're doing here is not that, but inside of our, yes, 2 labs. So the first thing is this is the easy lab. So I would recommend you do this one first. Basically, we're gonna go over just scaffolding your React app from scratch like you did before. Basically, you're gonna fork this repo. There's nothing in the repo. So inside of the repo, you're actually gonna run that whole vite create React app, create it. And what I want you to do is basically, you know, creating it, that's your first step. Beautiful, good job. The second thing I want you to do is for the peeps that did not finish this lab where you actually have to set the count number there, and the color changes, I want you to take this logic, basically we just talked about it here, and basically put that into this lab here, this lab that I shared. Let's go that down there. So basically I want you to re-implement the click logic of basically changing the color based off of it being your number being divisible by 3, and also making sure that it's not It's not 0, like the color doesn't change on 0. We just did it, so this part should be easy. This is the easy lab. The next one, which will be a little bit harder, so I want y'all to kind of, again, don't be silent out here, work in groups. Also, let me make sure y'all can actually share your screens, because I don't think I gave you all the ability to share screens. Give me 1 second.
Hey, Hizvasio, I think I turned it on for
Oh,
students
perfect.
to be able
Thank you.
to. Yeah,
All right, awesome.
yeah. I've been on top of those little things.
Yeah, I appreciate you,
Yeah,
Shahir.
of
Yeah,
course,
you're
of course. Yeah.
the man. All right, so the next one is actually going to be basically playing around with passing data through different components. So this is React Context Counter. Um, Basically, same concept. You're going to be increasing and decreasing your counter. But again, we all know how to increase your counter. The next one is actually how do you decrease it? So how do you basically like take that state, bring it down one, and here's the gotcha. So if your your count is less than 0, I want you to not decrease it any further. So you should not hit -1. If you hit -1, basically you should kind of like blare like, hey, it can't be negative. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, here is the interesting thing. Our file structure is going to be slightly different. So we have like about 3 files here. So the first one is going to be our components. So first and foremost, our app.js, we're going to house, this is kind of like our main portion here. As you can see, we have this counter provider here. And within it, we have 2 components. One is the display, and the other is kind of the counter controller. This is where our buttons will live. This is where our display will live. This is kind of like our whole global app. So your goal is to kind of figure out how to kind of like, the buttons are going to be here. This is actually going to increase the count. How do you kind of update that to a different component? But also maybe like, how do you kind of keep it in this parent component so everything is kind of propagated down properly? That's kind of the gotcha here. So enough talk. Let me give you the first lab, which is the easy one, the gimme. I'm gonna put it in our cohort 2 chat. So this is lab, I'm gonna call it React Lab 1. React Lab 1. React Lab 2. Okay, so your 2 labs are there. I'm going to break y'all into groups as usual. I'm going to pull us out a little bit earlier this time. What I want us to do is to ensure that y'all are actually like, all understand what's happening. I'm going to like pick out one group. One group is actually going to kind of explain their solution. So we all can kind of basically, this is your book report. Be like, all right, this is how I did it. And even if you didn't do it, like how close did you get to? And then we can kind of talk through next steps. Okay. Okay. Any questions before I break y'all in the groups? None? None whatsoever. Also, while you're in groups, one of the things I want y'all to think through, I've been kind of randomizing y'all a lot, so y'all can kind of get a hold of and understand like who each other are, randomly. But, again, y'all are going to be picking out your groups on, like if y'all haven't already picked out your groups, you're going to be picking out your groups on Saturday. So really just kind of understand, get a vibe for each other. So, you can basically be like, all right, this person's a dork. No, I don't want to work with him. This person's cool. I want to work with that person. So, keep that in mind. And also that's part of the reason why, like there should be one person sharing their screen and kind of like, remember, like, Luis isn't here right now, but like as I mentioned, as Luis always mentioned, like, he's working with like his old classmates because basically they got together, they really worked really well together, and that just organically happened from like them taking classes together, but also um me and like a lot of like some of the old TAs that I worked with in the last cohort, we were all like just classmates in our last boot camp. And it basically, the reason why we are still friends, we still work together, we still kind of like chill, grab a beer together and stuff like that too sometimes, is basically like we worked on projects together, we just kind of like really enjoy basically um, each other as people, but also as developers, and that really just helped one help throughout our career. We always have people to kind of like just chat with, lean on, just talk tech with as well as life with, but also yeah, like this is also someone to kind of like help with like, hey, hey, there's this job over here that you might be good at for, like basically getting the plug for a role that might be popping up or so on and so forth. So um this may not feel like the same thing, but like trust me, it is. Like, for example, some of y'all who are going to the Air Force, you might find a colleague in another school, and y'all may actually like just like really vibe and basically just like you might meet that person in 5 years working at the same company, or that person might be at a company you are interviewing for. So just keep that in mind. Y'all are in a CUNY school. Uh, Tech is big, but also small. So let me stop ranting and let me get y'all in the groups. So I'm gonna close all rooms, close all rooms first, and now I'm gonna put y'all in the groups. But recreate. Let's close that. Let's jump groups. Recreate. Sign automatically. Okay. Any questions before we get into it? Nah. Yeah, may. All right. Well, we'll be here in the lobby. I'm trying to cut up the lesson so y'all have it in recording form. So like I'll be here and the TAs will be here. Okay. All right. See y'all in like about 8:20. Okay. Rooms are open. All right. And we're back. Okay. So, how's the lab for everyone? Yeah, so. Um, does anyone want to kind of uh like present like their architecture or just kind of like talk through where they got up to in the lab? Any group out here? Don't be shy. You're gonna actually have to present your
I
architectural
can
thinking
finish
and
in
stuff
mine.
like that. Oh yeah, I know. Where'd you get up to though?
I'm on the first lab. Like, I guess they're like the random cat fact.
Ah, okay, I see. Yeah. We'll get you caught up. Basically, so again, what's gonna happen on Saturday is for the students that are kind of running behind, we'll kind of make sure that there's a little section where a couple of the TAs will kind of help you get to speed, especially when the room breaks off into two. Um, And then the other half, will be starting to break off in the group for their projects. We'll go into a little bit more on the component life cycle and how you should handle it now. Maybe a little bit more into API stuff as well, just so y'all can kind of understand how to grab data from some ethereal third party API and put it into your app. I'll show you how you can do it in a cool way. And I guess what I would challenge y'all to do is, find your group for your capstone, and then kind of maybe work on a couple of the labs that some of like your group members are running behind on. So let's say if there's one person that's basically already caught up, and the other person is like, hey, I'm like 3, 5 labs behind. Maybe a good way to kind of just practice working with each other is kind of like doing the whole pair programming driver navigator to kind of get them up to speed. And that will kind of help y'all understand how to work together, which is important in um, like working on your capstone, but also just it's an important skill to have in software development in general. If y'all don't have any questions um, for now, I will kind of leave y'all to your a little bit to your own devices for um basically I'll give y'all like is it your 3 minutes back and I'll see y'all on Saturday. I hope y'all will be excited to my homework is for y'all is to finish your labs, but also to yeah, really think about what you want to build, like think about what excites you in software development, what excites you in what app do you want to see in the world that isn't already made, what app that you want to see in the world that's probably already made but you think it's stupid to be paying a subscription fee for. Hell, I love the app Noom, but I stopped using it because I was like, "Yo, this is way too much money." So I'm gonna rebuild that from scratch. Make it free. Get sued. All right, I showed up.
Remember the good old days when Spotify was free?
Yo, yeah, exactly.